Bruce Lee was challenged by Jackie Chan and said try me, 1 second later changed martial arts. Bruce Lee vs. Jackie Chan, the legend rewritten. The challenge had been issued in a whisper, but it echoed like thunder backstage at the Hong Kong cinema. Jackie Chan, then an ambitious young stuntman, had questioned Bruce Lee's technique during a filming of The Big Boss. "Your Wing Chun is beautiful, but it doesn't work in the real world," he had said, with the arrogance of someone who didn't yet know the weight of his own words. Bruce, who until then had been watching the boy curiously, slowly turned around. His eyes, dark as the Kowloon night, fixed on Jackie's. "Try me," he said, in a tone that brooked no reply. A second later, the world stopped. There was no warning. There was no preparation. Bruce moved like lightning, but not like the other fighters, not like the kung fu masters Jackie had faced in the ring or on the streets. He didn't attack. He disappeared. A split second before Jackie could react, Bruce was behind him, an arm wrapped around his neck, not to choke, but to demonstrate. "Do you feel that?" he murmured, his voice calm as if they were having afternoon tea. "That's the void. The space between what you see and what you think you see. You train to fight what's in front of you. I train to fight what's not." Jackie, stunned, tried to free himself, but his body wouldn't respond. It wasn't strength, it was precision. Bruce's every move nullified his own before he even completed it. When he finally managed to free himself, he staggered back, his lungs burning. Bruce hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't been breathing hard. He just watched him, like a teacher evaluating a promising student. "You're fast," Bruce admitted. "But speed without purpose is like a tiger without claws. You fight to win. I fight to understand." Jackie, with his pride hurt, spat blood on the ground. "Then teach me." Bruce smiled, but it wasn't a victory smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found a diamond in the rough. "No. You already have a master. What you need is a mirror." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jackie alone on the set, weighed down by a lesson that would take years to decipher. The legacy of the second. In the years that followed, Jackie Chan did not become a disciple of Bruce Lee. But he became another. While Bruce revolutionized cinema with his be water philosophy, Jackie turned the pain of that encounter into fuel. He studied Bruce's every move, not to copy him, but to deconstruct him. If Bruce was the sharp blade, Jackie would be the hammer, hard, tough, capable of breaking any form. They never fought again. But the shadow of that second haunted them. Bruce died young, as if he knew his mission was accomplished. Jackie, in turn, lived long enough to see his own legend grow, not as a rival, but as the other side of the same coin. In his films, he embodied the chaos that Bruce had tamed: impossible stunts, falls that should kill, a style that laughed at gravity. "Bruce showed me what I wasn't," Jackie would say decades later, in a rare interview. "And it freed me to be who I was." In the end, there was no winner. There were only two men who, for an instant, touched the essence of what it meant to be a martial artist, not mastery of the body, but surrender to it. Bruce taught Jackie how to see. Jackie taught the world how to feel. And so, the second thing that changed martial arts was not a fight. It was an awakening. The legacy in motion. Years have passed since that encounter on the streets of Hong Kong. Bruce Lee left early, leaving behind a void that no one could fill, not even Jackie Chan, who gradually came to understand that his own journey was not a continuation, but a response. While Bruce had carved his body and mind into a sharp blade, Jackie chose to dance on broken glass, transforming pain into choreography, fear into laughter. His first successful film, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, was a reckoning with himself. In it, Jackie played a clumsy apprentice who, by chance, discovers the secret to a forgotten style of kung fu. There were no perfect strikes, just attempts, falls, and the stubbornness to get up. The audience laughed, but also recognized something true: martial art was not about being invincible, but about persisting. Bruce had shown the way to precision, Jackie, the one with resilience. But the world was not ready for that lesson. The producers wanted more of the same. Bruce Lee had set a standard, and now they expected Jackie to repeat it. "Why don't you fight seriously?" they asked. "Why don't you show your strength?" He tried to explain that his strength lay in just the opposite, in his ability to absorb blows and move forward, but words were lost amid tight contracts and budgets. In Drunken Master, he found a way out. The drunk style was not just funny, it was philosophical. The drunk fighter did not move with logic, but with instinct, and it was precisely this unpredictability that made him dangerous. It was the antithesis of Bruce, and, at the same time, his most sincere tribute. Meanwhile, in the United States, Bruce's shadow grew. His films were re-released, his teachings distorted by imitators who only saw the surface. Jackie watched everything from afar, with a mixture of pride and frustration. One day, an American journalist asked him, "Do you think you will ever surpass Bruce Lee?" He smiled, but his eyes were tired. Bruce wasn't a target to be broken. He was a mirror. "And I spent my whole life trying not to break mine." The answer came in Police Story. It was not a martial arts film, but a manifesto. Jackie has scaled buildings, slid down handrails, been electrocuted, crushed by cars, and still gotten up. There was no philosophy between the lines, there was only the body, tested to the limit, and the refusal to fall. When the final scene ended, the audience gave a standing ovation. It wasn't a movie about fighting. It was about surviving. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure took its toll. Injuries were piling up, broken ribs, dislocated fingers, a fractured skull that nearly killed him while filming Armor of God. Doctors warned him, "If you keep going like this, you won't make it to 50. Jackie listened, nodded, and the next day he returned to the set. It wasn't stubbornness. It was the only way he knew to honor what Bruce had taught him. The body was not a temple, but an instrument. And instruments were made to be used. The turning point came when I least expected it. On a trip to Los Angeles, Jackie was invited to an event honoring Bruce. On stage, in front of an audience that included fans and critics, he was asked about his relationship with the master's legacy. Instead of answering, he asked for a microphone and a chair. He sat down, crossed his legs, and began to tell a story about a young man who one day saw a man fly without wings, and spent the rest of his life trying to understand how. "Bruce showed me that martial art is not about winning," he said, his voice calm. "It's about not stopping. Even when you don't know where you're going." Then, without warning, he stood up and performed a sequence of movements, not Bruce's precise strikes, but a clumsy dance, full of calculated stumbles, that ended with him falling backwards onto the floor. The audience held its breath. Jackie stood there, motionless, for a second that seemed like an eternity. Then he smiled and stood up, dusting himself off. "That's Kung Fu too." The silence broke into applause. They were not for an invincible hero, but for a man who had turned his flaws into art. Over the next few years, Jackie slowed down. Not out of fear, but because he finally understood that true mastery wasn't in how many times you fell, but in how you got up. He directed films, produced, taught. In one of his last interviews, a reporter asked him, "If you could say anything to Bruce today, what would it be?" Jackie thought for a long moment. "I would say thank you. And that I finally understood what he meant by be water. It's not about flowing without resistance. It's about adapting. Even when the current tries to drag you under." He died at age 70, not on a film set, but in his home, surrounded by family and friends. At his wake, a young actor, one of many whom Jackie had inspired, placed a pair of boxing gloves next to the casket. "To the man who taught us that fighting isn't just about throwing punches," he whispered. Bruce and Jackie never really faced each other. But in some ways, their struggle lasted decades, a dance between discipline and chaos, between the perfect and the imperfect. And when the lights went out for both of them, what remained was not a victory, but a legacy, that true martial art is not in what you do with your body, but in what your body does to you. And so, the second that changed martial arts spanned a lifetime. Not as an instant, but as a movement, continuous, unpredictable, and eternally human. The last round. Years after Jackie Chan's death, the world of martial arts still breathes the echo of that fight that never happened. Bruce Lee had gone first, leaving behind a philosophy carved in sweat and blood, a legacy of precision that many tried to emulate but few understood. Jackie, in turn, had transformed chaos into poetry, proving that even falls could be choreographed with grace. But between them, something greater than rivalry had been born, a creative tension that shaped generations. It was in a small dojo in Hong Kong, decades after their peak, that the last chapter of this story began to unfold. The place belonged to Mei Ling, a former stunt woman who had worked with Jackie in her last films and who now taught children how to fall without hurting themselves, literally. Among his students was Kai, a thin, sharp-eyed teenager obsessed with Bruce Lee. Kai trained until his hands bled, repeating the movements from Enter the Dragon as if they were sacred scripture. He despised Jackie's style, calling it circus under his breath, as if comedy were a sin. "You don't understand," Kai said to Mei Ling, while adjusting his posture into a perfect Wing Chun. Bruce didn't play. He turned his body into a weapon. Jackie was just clowning around. Mei Ling, who had heard variations of that speech dozens of times, just smiled and threw a tennis ball against the wall. The boy had to dodge without losing his balance. "What if I told you that Bruce laughed too?" she asked one day, while Kai stood up, frustrated. "Have you ever seen the behind-the-scenes recordings of the Big Boss? He tripped, fell, made fun of himself. The difference is that he didn't let the public see it." Kai snorted. "That's a lie. He was perfect." "No one is perfect," Mei Ling replied, throwing the ball again. "Not Bruce. Not Jackie. Not you." The conflict came in the form of a tournament. Not one of those pompous Hollywood events, but a local competition, organized by martial arts veterans who wanted to keep the flame of what they called real fighting alive. Kai, of course, signed up. Your goal? Proving that Bruce Lee's style, precise, lethal, no room for error, was superior to anything else. But there was a problem. Among those signed up was Run, a Sanzho fighter who had grown up watching Jackie's films. Ren wasn't technical like Kai, but he was unpredictable, adaptable, and knew how to use the environment to his advantage, just like Jackie would. The two faced each other in the semifinals. The ring was small, surrounded by an audience that barely fit in the warehouse. Kai entered with the confidence of someone who had memorized every detail of Jeet Kune Do. Ron, on the other hand, smiled as if he already knew the end of the story. The fight began with Kai attacking in sequence, high kicks and calculated punches. Ren dodged, but didn't counterattack, he just dodged, as if he was expecting something. Then, in the third round, Kai made a mistake. As he attempted a spin kick, his foot slipped on the sweaty floor. For a second, he was vulnerable. Ron could have finished him off there. He could have dealt a decisive blow, as Bruce would. But instead, he reached out and grabbed Kai's arm, stopping him from falling face first onto the mat. "Are you okay?" Ren asked, while the audience murmured. Kai, humiliated, pushed him away. "I don't need your help." Ren stepped back, raising his hands in a sign of peace. "I know. But Jackie taught me that fighting isn't just about winning. It's about not letting others get hurt for nothing." Kai didn't listen. In the next round, he attacked with blind fury, but Ron, instead of fighting back, started laughing. Not mockingly, it was a genuine laugh, as if he was having fun. And then, in one fluid movement, he dodged a punch, grabbed Kai around the waist, and threw him over his shoulder, but not hard. It was perfect yukami, just like Mei Ling had taught. Kai fell on his back, but without getting hurt. The audience exploded in applause. Kai, stunned, looked at Ren as if he had cheated. "This isn't fighting," he spat. Yes it is, Run replied, extending his hand again. It's the fight that Jackie taught us. The one that doesn't break bones, but breaks pride. Kai hesitated. Then, for the first time, he took the outstretched hand. In the end, Kai did not win the tournament. But he gained something more important, the understanding that martial art was not a dichotomy between Bruce and Jackie, between discipline and chaos, between perfection and imperfection. It was a spectrum. And the true mastery was knowing when to be one, when to be the other, and when to simply let the body decide. Years later, Kai became a fight choreographer, working on films that blended Bruce's precision with Jackie's creativity. And in one of his first productions, he put on a scene in which a fighter, after being knocked down, laughed before getting up. The director wanted to cut it, no one laughs in the middle of a fight. But Kai insisted. Jackie laughed, he said. And Bruce too, sometimes. The scene stayed. And so, the movement continued. Not as an instant, but as a dance, continuous, unpredictable, and eternally human. The legacy in motion. Kai never imagined that argument on the film set would become a turning point. The director, a stern man with years of experience in classic action films, crossed his arms in disbelief. Laughing during a fight? It breaks the tension. It feels like a joke. Kai took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the memories that had led him there. He remembered the first time he saw Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, the surgical precision of his blows, the economy of movement that made each punch seem like a sentence. But he also remembered Jackie Chan's snickers backstage at Drunken Master, when an improvised strike went wrong and, instead of frustration, came laughter, because, deep down, that was what made the fight come alive. Bruce laughed when he hit something no one expected, Kai said, lowering his voice. Jackie laughed when he made mistakes. They both knew that fighting isn't just technique. It's reaction. It's instinct. It's humanity. The director frowned, but something in those words made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way Kai spoke, as if each syllable carried the echo of decades of sweat and bruises. Or perhaps it was the fact that in recent years, fight films had become so polished that they had lost their soul. Okay, the director finally gave in. But if the scene doesn't work, it's your fault. Kai smiled. It was not a victory, but a beginning. The scene that changed everything. The day of filming arrived in sweltering heat. The actor, a young man named Run, had talent but still struggled to find his own voice in the movement. Kai watched him from afar, adjusting the last details of the choreography. The fight was simple, a duel in a narrow alley, exposed brick walls, sunlight cutting through the shadows at dramatic angles. But what mattered wasn't the technique, it was what happened after the first blow. Remember, Kai said to Run, as the preparations finished. You're not a robot. You're a guy who just got punched in the jaw. How do you react? Ren nodded, but Kai noticed the doubt in the boy's eyes. He had already worked with many actors like that, impeccable technicians, but who still didn't understand that the fight wasn't just about hitting the target, it was about feeling the impact. The clapperboard sounded. Action. The fight began as planned. Ren blocked, counterattacked, spun in the air with the grace of a dancer. But then, just as his character was supposed to be taken down, something unexpected happened. The stuntman, a veteran named Lau, who had worked with Jackie in the 1980s, slightly exaggerated the stunt, causing Ren to trip and fall backwards onto the hard floor. For a second, there was silence. Ren blinked, stunned. And then, without thinking, he laughed. It wasn't a forced, rehearsed laugh. It was genuine, a short sound, half surprised, half relieved, as if the body itself was saying, okay, that hurt, but what the hell, let's keep going. Kai held his breath. The director, behind the camera, made a gesture to cut. But before he could speak, Ren was already standing up, still smiling, and the fight began again, this time with a different energy. It was no longer perfect choreography. It was real. The domino effect. The scene not only stayed in the film but also became one of the most talked about moments. Critics praised the authenticity of the moment, fans created theories about what that laugh meant, and other choreographers began to rethink their approaches. But the biggest impact was on Run. After filming, he looked for Kai backstage. "I didn't plan that," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "It was like my body knew what to do before I did." Kai smiled. "That's exactly how I felt when I first saw Jackie. Sometimes the fight isn't about thinking. It's about letting the body remember." Ren looked at his hands, as if they held secrets he hadn't yet discovered. "I want to learn more." Kai didn't respond right away. Instead, he took an old notebook from his pocket, yellowed with age, and handed it to the boy. "Here's everything I learned. Techniques, yes, but also mistakes. Laughter. Falls. Things that aren't in the manuals." Rin flipped through the pages, seeing doodles of movements, notes on old films, even a sketch of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan side by side, as if they were two halves of the same whole. "Why me?" Ren asked. "Because you laughed," Kai said simply. "And that means you already understand more than most." The circle closes. Years later, Kai watched a new Rin film, this time as the protagonist. The young actor had developed his own style, a blend of precision and improvisation that was reminiscent of both Bruce and Jackie, but with a unique identity. And, of course, there was a scene where his character laughed in the middle of a fight. Kai smiled when he saw that. It wasn't a copy. It was an evolution. Ultimately, the martial art had never been about choosing a side. It was about understanding that perfection and imperfection were not opposites, they were part of the same movement. Like breathing, inspiration and exhalation, tension and relaxation, control and surrender. And so, the legacy continued. Not like a straight line, but like a river, always changing, always flowing, carrying with it the voices of those who came before, but also the laughter, the mistakes, and the discoveries of those yet to come.